I'm starting a brand new video series called What If History. And I'm going to explore various historical points of importance and what would have occurred if certain things hadn't happened. Okay, so the first one we're going to do today is on if France didn't get involved in the American Revolutionary War. I'm going to explore three possible scenarios for if France never involved itself in the American Revolutionary War. Now, I love the country that I was born in, that I've grown up in, that I've lived in my entire life, other than a couple months that I spent in Poland, and Poland is a beautiful country. But one thing that I don't think Americans do well enough is explain the importance of other places outside of America in history, okay? And I don't think there's anything wrong with the people of a country studying their own country's history. It's very important. But a lot of people don't talk enough about how France was heavily involved in the American Revolutionary War. Really helped the colonists be successful in fighting the British. But let's take a minute to imagine a world where France never stepped in to help the Americans against the British. At the time, France was also in conflict with the British and had been for quite some time. Let's do a quick recap of how the Revolutionary War played out. Going forward, members of my website are always going to have exclusive content available only to them. In addition to that, they're going to get a 20% discount on any merchandise purchases and have the ability to message me directly. I am going to be doing a merchandise drop every single month. This is one of the new ones. All right, I've already done one, but this is the newest one we're doing, and I'm super excited about it. So if you're planning on buying merch, please go sign up, and don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter as well. Getting back to the American Revolutionary War. It was fought from 1775 to 1783, and it was obviously a pivotal point in history, okay? And I'm not just saying that because I'm an American, but America has had a major impact on pretty much the entire world since its founding, since its inception, since its creation. The American Revolutionary War began with the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775. The Continental Army, led by George Washington, faced what was then the most powerful military that's ever existed, the British Empire, okay? The sun never set on them, that's what they used to say. In 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, asserting that the colonies had the right to self-governance. Despite initial and numerous setbacks, specifically things like the loss of New York, the Americans eventually did overcome the British. There were many significant victories like that of Trenton and Saratoga. In 1778, France officially entered the war, providing crucial military and financial support to the budding American. French troops and naval forces played absolutely pivotal, crucial roles in many of the conflicts of the American Revolutionary War. This ultimately culminated in the British surrender at Yorktown in 1781. This victory then paved the way for the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The Treaty of Paris is what officially gave America independence from the British. But what if France had never intervened? Let's explore three possible scenarios. Today's exclusive content is going to go over some key figures, the rise of and use of guerrilla tactics in the conflict, and then also the birth of American military intelligence, which I'm super excited to talk about because I've been a military intelligence professional for over 12 years now. So it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm very passionate about it. I love it. That will be available again to members of my website, and then also you get a bunch of other benefits to go along with it. So please consider signing up. I appreciate you guys watching up to this point. Scenario one that we're going to discuss is a prolonged war culminating in British victory. Without the assistance of the French troops and naval forces, the Americans would have had tremendous difficulty maintaining momentum against the much more superior British forces, okay? A lot of the American Revolutionary War was painted with logistical issues. Specifically, the very first battle of the Revolutionary War, the only reason the Americans lost was because they literally ran out of bullets. They had problems with logistics, okay? And that's when they started kind of learning the importance of some of this stuff. Funny enough, a lot of American military history after that even took us a long time to learn these lessons, how important logistics is. But getting back to the scenario, okay, we've got a prolonged war with the British because there's no decisive element that can help give America the oomph that it needs to push back against the British who they were fighting. Okay, so likely would have occurred is morale would have plummeted, and morale was a major issue anyway for George Washington's army. With depleting morale and financial resources, the Continental Congress would likely have been forced to come to the negotiating table with the British on unfavorable terms. The colonies then would have remained under British rule, which is obviously the exact opposite of how history ended up. America literally and metaphorically could not afford a prolonged war with the British. They had more resources, more professional resources, and despite the fact that the British was operating all over the planet at that point, without the support of the French, they would have been able to muster enough to crush the rebellion over time. Our second scenario has to do with an increased use of guerrilla warfare and a stalemate between the British and the US. Without the might of the French army, Continental forces would have had to transition even more to unconventional tactics, and there are specific key figures in this that anybody who's a history buff probably already knows the name of, but I'm going to tell you about them now. Leaders like Nathaniel Greene and Francis Marion would have been even more pivotal than they were historically in this transition to almost entirely guerrilla tactics. Now, the Continental Army was not a conventional force, okay? They were barely holding themselves together for most of the Revolutionary War. There would have been no way for them to go toe-to-toe with the British Army. They didn't have the resources, they didn't have the manpower, and back then, morale was a huge factor. Now, if somebody goes AWOL, if they just leave the military, eventually we'll probably find them. But back then, you could just dip to the next closest town. Nobody would have any idea what you were doing before. There was no way to hold people accountable for stuff like that. The British likely would have maintained control of major cities in this scenario, but the harassing guerrilla attacks would have been costly for them, and they had other conflicts that were going on around the world, so they really couldn't spend a lot of time on this necessarily. The war likely would have dragged on into the 1780s, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory. Eventually, both sides would have grown weary, and then a stalemate would have ensued, maybe even a ceasefire, whatever. Coming to the negotiating table, the British and the budding Americans would have probably come to some agreement where the British maintained an element of control over America, while also granting the colonies some level of autonomy. It is highly likely that this would have set the stage for many future conflicts in the centuries to come. In scenario 3, we have the US seeking foreign aid from other sources outside of France. I think this is probably the most likely scenario. There was no way that the Continentals were going to win this conflict on their own. They didn't have what they needed. They didn't have the resources, they didn't have the money, and they didn't have the troops. So it's my opinion that this is the most likely scenario where they would have sought aid from other countries, probably countries that were also at conflict with the British. It would have been a mutually beneficial agreement is what they would have sought. Realizing that they absolutely had to have foreign support in order to win this conflict, it is my opinion that they would have turned to the Netherlands and to Spain, both countries with vested interest in limiting and reducing British influence, not only globally, but for their own interests. Spain and the Netherlands likely would have provided limited military aid and financial aid to the colonists. The intervention of the Netherlands and of Spain likely wouldn't have been as impactful, okay, as the French intervention. The French were at conflict with the British for a very long time. They were significant enemies, okay, but the added pressure of two more countries involved in this, it would have forced the British to re-look at their stance on the conflict in general. One of the main reasons why I believe Spain would have decided to involve itself in this conflict had France not and the colonists approached it was their long-standing rivalry with the British. Spain had an extremely long history of rivalry with trade routes with the British. I think I just said with a lot, and I'm sorry. Weakening the British in North America would have served Spain's interest tremendously. It would have been extremely beneficial for Spain. The Netherlands, on the other hand, had significant interest economically, but also they were already at war with the British anyway. From 1780 to 1784, they were in conflict with the British, and so these two things, I think it would have been a really easy ask for them to align themselves with America and fight the British together. Weakening the British on one front could have helped them weaken the British on all fronts and ultimately serve their interests. Key battles likely would have seen mixed results, but overall, I think the wins and losses of the Revolutionary War would have played out roughly the same in this scenario. By the mid-1780s, the British would have seen how costly this conflict was, and being faced with enemies on multiple fronts would have been forced to come to the negotiating table. A treaty in the mid-1780s would have seen American independence like the Treaty of Paris did in what actually played out in history. I do believe that because of the limited support that the Netherlands and Spain, the limited support they would have provided, I think there would have been more concessions in favor of British interest in this scenario, but ultimately with roughly the same outcome as what actually occurred in history. It can't really be understated how pivotal France's involvement in the Revolutionary War was. Without the French, it's highly likely, probably most likely, that America would not be who it is today, an independent nation and one of the most powerful nations on earth. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, all of that stuff. And I'd love to hear what you guys want to see out of this stuff. What other what-if scenarios do you want me to play out? Do you want me to analyze? Do you want me to take a look at and make videos about? This is something that is incredibly interesting to me. And remember, on my website, there's going to be some exclusive content, so go check it out.